we are frogs boiling in the pot. And for those of us who understand that democracy is messy, but absolutely essential to the human spirit and to eventual, progress towards greater justice and greater equality, I I'm really fearful about the potential for North Korean troops to be sent into Ukraine for real this time. And if the US doesn't join in NATO doing something to counter that, how's that going to go?
From pandemics and wars to artificial intelligence and geopolitical competition, the pace of change is accelerating. Yet governments, businesses, and societies continue to be surprised by events they often should have seen coming. This episode explores why strategic foresight has become one of the most important disciplines of the 21st century. Rather than attempting to predict the future, strategic foresight equips leaders to prepare for multiple possible futures, identifying emerging risks, recognizing opportunities, and making better decisions under uncertainty. To discuss this important topic, I'm delighted to welcome Patti Morrissey. Patti is the founder of Global Foresight Strategies, a US-based strategic foresight and risk mitigation consultancy. She brings more than 3 decades of experience at the highest levels of the US national security community, having served in senior policy and strategy roles in the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Throughout her career, Patti has helped governments and organizations better understand emerging risks, anticipate strategic disruption, and prepare for an increasingly uncertain future. Patti, welcome to the Focus Podcast.
Thank you, John. Happy to be here,
Thank
coming in
you.
from Alexandria, Virginia.
Patti, could you begin by telling us a little about your own professional journey and what first drew you into the whole strategic foresight business?
Sure. I actually started doing nuclear arms control at the Pentagon because there were so many implications for weapons platforms, and the treaty needed to reflect a wise force structure post Cold War. But I had a Air Force colonel pull me over to do long range planning, and that really incorporated a methodology that forced us to think about where are we going to be in 5 to 10 years. So I was put in charge of the Revolution in Military Affairs briefing, which is
Mm.
just part of this whole world of like, how do you anticipate that things could have very profound effects on how things play out in a security. In that case, it was very hard security, but evolving to a much broader view of what security is. So I started at Air Force Long Range Planning and went to the Office of Net Assessment, Office of the Secretary of Defense for Net Assessment. Some people in the international affairs world really are very familiar with that office because Mr. Andrew Marshall was the head of it for 43 years. And he was given quite a bit of credit for helping to end the Cold War by developing what he called competitive strategies. And that involved having to look forward and figure out where can I create competitive advantage against my adversary that's not in a hot war military balance aspect, right? Like being able to think really broadly about what this competition for securing your own way of governance and your own national security, what is that going to take? And that obviously involved two giant blocks of the world. We all know what happened there. But that sort of started me on my journey. And then I was asked to be part of the first information warfare net assessment in the Pentagon. And again, the net assessment is to look at where are we right now? And it was very broad compared to, again, the traditional military balance was very much weapons platforms, where are they located, offense, defense, but not this broader set of what is power in this evolving world. So information warfare net assessment was about thinking about how information technology would change that equation. And I started doing that in 1995 when most people are like, what are you even talking about? So, building on that, that kind of became my core thing. Long range planning infused with a systematic approach to thinking about the future and not the 20 years out, what super cool thing could be happening will be will we all have like robots in our kitchens, right? It was
Mhm.
more 3 to 5 to 7 years out, how could the balance of power shift and what decisions could we shape to put the US in the first instance. And then as I left the Pentagon, went to the Director of National Intelligence. I was a strategy officer, helped write the National Intelligence Strategy of 2009, but then was on a rotation to the Department of State, Intelligence and Research to lead a program called Global Futures Forum, which was 24 member nations working together to anticipate the global threats that we all needed to kind of get our leaderships to posture against as a collective. Climate change was a big part of it, and all the things that we're seeing play out now were part of the discussion. Weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, terrorism and identity politics, emerging technologies. We had a group that was doing the analytic practice of foresight. So I was the global coordinator for that because the US had started this Global Futures Forum. Unfortunately, some bureaucratic things happened inside the US government that led to the US pulling out, which kind of broke the whole thing up, which is really sad. And but that became the model for what is now my business, which Global Foresight Strategies core is around how do we think about the future in a comprehensive, disciplined way. It's never going to be black and white. We all know that. You have to be comfortable with this ambiguity, but making the best decisions to shape the future that we want is crucial. And it's very different than like people that talk about forecasting. And it's not about prediction. It's about pointing to places where decisions should be made to go in, vector in a certain direction and away from bad stuff. And that takes, in some cases, many decisions to get you there. Um, but anyway, that's how I got into it and fell in love with it. And as one of my previous bosses at the DNI said, this is your sweet spot. And he's now one of my strategic advisors. I have 3 former bosses who are strategic advisors to my company. So I love
Wow.
that.
So, Patty, looking at the contemporary situation, and given the fact that you have this background, how do you see things like Iran's nuclear weapons program? Is it something that was predicted to have been a problem for a long time now, or is it something that really wasn't ever a problem because, as far as all the open source information that we have, the Iranians weren't really they were a nuclear threshold state, but they weren't about to gamble with crossing over the line. How do you see where this is all going? Because of course the Trump administration is making a lot out of the fact that they want to prevent Iran from being a nuclear weapons state. Was that ever a thing?
I have to be a little careful because I work for the National Intelligence Manager for Military Issues, and we did Iran, and so I have to be a little careful with respect to what I know or don't know. But the I think the way I would answer that is that starting minimally in the George W. Bush administration and then going over into the Obama administration, there was a very concerted effort to be strategically shaping the environment to disincentivize Iran, not through hard power, through mostly economic warfare. And there's a book called Choke Points that I read a couple months ago that was really eye-opening in the work that it took. I mean, the people in Treasury, especially Department of Treasury, took the lead there, and their intel group was just phenomenal in making all these decisions to get to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, right? And we all see headlines and we all kind of I mean, the average citizen probably doesn't know how to feel about this stuff. But one of my advisors, one of my former bosses when I did nuclear arms control, who was the State Department lead for the implementation of the START treaties. So he was at all the verification, inspections, et cetera. He was the lead U.S. official. He told me that the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, had the most rigorous verification regime of any arms control agreement that had ever been. So, so that was a strategic effort crossing administrations to get to a point where Iran was pushed into the corner of, is this going to be worth it? And they said, no, we'll sign the agreement. So there are people, some of them friends of mine, that will say, well, what about the Shia militias? What about Hezbollah? Right? Like, but the fact that that part of the problem, the nuclear proliferation problem, the powder keg of even the whiff of Iran having the potential to put their enriched uranium into a warhead and have it on a deployed system, like, I mean, that was cut off by the JCPOA, and it didn't solve all the, Iran proxy problems, but so I'm trying to answer your question in a way that says there are strategic ways that are requiring patience, requiring study, requiring reading the presidential daily brief, which our current president is known to not do. And there was, I think, a knee-jerk or a political and not informed political decision to cancel the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And we are all paying the price. The world, this is my opinion, that there then became no real way to assure Israel and the rest of the world that Iran wouldn't get a nuke, because the IAEA was no longer in the equation to do the verification regime. So this is a strategic problem that you're teeing up here, that we see bad decisions were made, mainly by a president who was not prepared to be a president, commander in chief, didn't, not everyone comes in prepared, obviously, but didn't really, from the books I've read on the first administration, didn't take the time to really study the things that are required to be making really important international security decisions. I don't want to go on and on this, but the strategic implications are profound and we are living them. And I think Trump is paying for it. I think he's trying to basically lie about what's happening, and people can see what's happening. And one more thing, we did so many war games on Iran, and all of them said they're going to shut down the Straits of Hormuz, they're going to use small boats, they're going to attack commercial shipping. Yep. They did exactly what we war gamed. Someone could have told the president, perhaps the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, could have told the president, this is what's going to happen. That's foresight that had been tested and played out over and over. But you have to get leaders who actually listen.
Well, Patty, just to share a little bit of stuff in confidence. I mean, I lived and worked in the UAE for an Emirati think tank, and again, as part of my career journey, I had the pleasure and the privilege to work with some CENTCOM people. And this is at the height of the whole Iraq civil war situation about the 2006, 2008 period.
Mhm.
And we all knew what the Iranians would do if they were pushed back then.
Yes.
So here's my question for you. If strategic foresight takes discipline, what has happened to this administration, to this Pentagon, to this US State Department, where the signs were everywhere for those who either could choose to remember them or to see them or to pick up a book, that this was what Iran would do, and the kind of international implications that would automatically flow from this sort of thing. Where were the smart folk like yourself in this administration? Because something has gone catastrophically wrong. And, we can blame Trump. Everyone likes blaming Trump. The buck stops with the president, obviously. But he brings with him now his retinue of less than stellar cabinet members who should know better and who should have the confidence to speak truth to power. And the other thing that I have to ask you just on this particular thing, with strategic foresight comes the idea that maybe the US president would be somehow, I don't know, gullible isn't the right word, but I'm just struggling to find the right word at the moment, but soft enough maybe to entertain the Israeli prime minister, who has always said that Iran was 2 weeks away from a weaponized nuclear program. For him then to go to Washington, to sit in the briefing room with Trump and to deliver his umpteenth message of the sort of threat. I mean, who would foresee that an Israeli prime minister would have this sort of influence on a US president? I don't know. I mean, that was probably, if I put my analyst hat on, of all the things that could not have been seen, the US president as the office is always about the United States. Trump's rhetoric was all about America first. And yet, when his instincts kicked in, it was all about Bibi. And it was all about believing what Bibi and his briefing had said to him on that day that led us to where we are today. There was a blind spot here. Please
I
explain.
mean, the big picture is that leadership requires that this quality of respecting science, data, experts, and not seeing them as a threat to you because you don't have that, but a real leader would not have done. So let me just give you an example of what happened right away at the beginning of the Trump administration. Number two, you know this, John, but maybe some of the listeners don't. They devastated USAID, which was an incredible strategic asset. They slandered the leadership, they slandered the programs because there may have been a few, errant, programs that didn't produce. Well, welcome to the world. Like that is all over the Pentagon. I was in the Pentagon for over 20 years. Like any company's going to have programs that get funded and don't work out, right? So those people at USAID, in my opinion, I worked with them for years, are the best-hearted, most strategic people in that they see all of the activities they were doing as preventing hunger, terrorism, violence, right? So strategic asset number one, blown up, right? Okay, then they abolish the Office of Net Assessment, which was the office, as we mentioned earlier, that was credited with ending the Cold War. Incredibly respected. When I went over to work there, everyone was like, wow, you're working with Mr. Martin. To this day, they say that, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
he just was seen as this incredible, wise intellect whispering in the ear of the Secretary of Defense. Many over from 1973 to Obama. I think he retired in 2012. Um, so they abolished that. My friend was working there, and he said they're trying to get it back because the Deputy Secretary of War understands this asset,
Mm-hmm.
but they've been spinning their wheels for a year and a half. So they're resurrecting it supposedly, but why did you blow it up in the first place? This was one of the most strategically valuable assets in the entire history of the Office of Secretary of Defense. So that's two. Three, I worked in the Office of Intelligence and Research Directorate for Outreach. And the Director for Outreach was in charge of partnerships with across the intelligence community, with the National Intelligence Council, the National Intelligence Officers, who many of your listeners will know are the highest level analyst position advising the White House, working with foreign partners. I was managing that Global Futures Forum program out of the Office of Outreach. What happened the first month of the Trump administration, number two? Gone. No Office of Outreach. Blow it up. Four, I went from the outreach to the National Intelligence Council Strategic Futures Group. Strategic Futures Group does the global trends document that is read around the world, that is extremely related to our work at Global Foresight Strategies. That Strategic Futures Group abolished. So
Right.
I'm giving you just a smattering of the most intellectually rigorous strategic analysis efforts of the US government blown up in the first month or two of 2025. And I don't mean to say blow up as a weapon, but abolished. We could talk about USAID and everything USAID did to manage conflict. It's scary, John. It's scary how unwise, to put it mildly, the decisions about our future, especially our security on all different levels, have played out since Trump got back in with his vendetta and I guess refused, and the Senate went along with it, refused to actually get smart, good people around him. And, people say, well, Marco Rubio knows the real deal. Well,
Yeah,
Marco
does he?
Rubio stood by and let USAID get blown up. Marco
Yeah.
Rubio's he could have said no to a lot of this other stuff too, but instead he watched Elon Musk come to town with a, you know,
Chainsaw. Mm.
chainsaw with a bunch
Yeah.
of kids who have no idea what
Yeah.
the prioritization of the US government should be. So it's all on every level. It's just been upside down world here. But back over to you because I can talk too much.
Patty, so can I. But I have another question for you. Riddle me this because I struggle with this. I really do. So, considering what we're living through at the moment, or at least what the United States is living through at the moment, if you were to take the oh my God sort of typology of everything, like it's oh my God, this is terrible. The whole system is being wrecked. What should strategic forecasters have known about Trump 45 that may have given us a clue of what to expect during Trump 47. Because, I've read the books and everyone is always beating up on Trump. He's incompetent. He's got a memory of a goldfish. He's this, he's that, he's everything else. And that's great. No worries. I get it. But these smart people did not see him make a comeback. These smart people did not red flag the fact that if he does make a comeback, he's going to literally blowtorch the system. So where did the failure come through? Because I mean, we're talking about the dying days of the Biden administration, where systems were still in place, and I like to think, the intelligence systems of any country are like the sensory organs of a body. But when you start burning off the nerve cells, you start losing the capacity to sense your environment around you. I think Donald Trump and his administration have done a marvelous job at that. And for all the kind of reasons that he says, well, I need to get a ballroom. Well, of course he has to. And he's kind of inverted, and I don't want to use the word, but I will anyway, just for argument's sake, perverted the idea of governance in the United States and what made the United States a force to be reckoned with globally. Because at the moment, the United States does not look like it did, even in the dying days of the Biden administration. Even after that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, we all still had faith that given the right people in charge and all the competencies that were in Washington, D.C., and all the Beltway people who were feeding into it, it'll all work out okay on the night. But I think those days are well and truly
Yeah,
behind
and
us now.
I think, the scary part is that the Senate, I think most of us kind of felt that enough senators would be rational and not confirm Hegseth and not confirm Tulsi Gabbard and not confirm Kash Patel. Like
They were crazy decisions.
it's
Crazy.
um it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And, we could have a long discussion about the American political system, which I've been, before I went to the DNI as a government person, I was a contractor. So I was able to do a lot of politics. I actually ran for House of Delegates in Virginia twice. I worked on multiple campaigns. I was a Republican in the 90s, worked for McCain in 99, 2000, um, and then left the party because I saw them reversing things. I saw them, um, you know, they dumped the Kyoto Treaty as soon as George W. was elected. Huge strategic mistake, right? I saw this inside the party, this really weird, like believing in conspiracies and like just, absolutist voters, which I say the people that are like one issue voters that can't broaden, can't see the bigger picture, can't make a decision based on like the overall like what's good for the country and sort of public like breadth of issues, not just about me and my salary went down or whatever, or my taxes went up $50 a month. So I've been cultivating, and I hope to write a book on this someday, this idea of political IQ. And I think
Mm.
everyone has their set of things they kind of use as their gauge for voting. And it's just so bifurcated in the US. You get A or
Mm.
B, and that's it. And I think that's a big frustration for people. I think I know some people that I still can't fathom it because they were military people. A couple people I know voted for Trump in 2024 after January 6th. What's their reason? I couldn't vote for Kamala Harris.
Mm.
Why? Because she might let transgender like girls play boys playing like what? Like, and I have some brothers. I have six brothers, and they all kind of lean to the right. And some of them were, indicating they were going to vote for Trump. And I'm like, God, guys, like Trump is literally undermining the strategic nuclear balance that NATO has held in place for 70 plus years. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't value our allies. Like there are some issues that are more important than transgender athletes. But then I had to step back and go, they didn't grow up in my world, which, they grew up in my world till I was 18. And then,
Mhm.
and I love my siblings. I have nine siblings. All the girls are on my side. But
Yeah.
just like, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but it was such a big question that you just asked. How do we teach people to think strategically, right? So I can't go back before I was brought in to do strategic planning for the Air Force, and I learned how to think differently.
Mm.
Before that, you have to be trained, cognitively trained to believe that you can think strategically and you can make decisions that project forward more than one issue, right? I don't think people get exposed to that. And there's so many things in that basket and in the political IQ basket that we could be doing in high school and college here. Yeah, and I know friends. I want to mention my friend Ellen McCarthy, who came out of she at the end of Trump one, she was the director of intelligence research at the State Department. I think she was working for Pompeo, and she was so horrified by the impact of disinformation on our national security that when
Mm.
she retired, she started this trust in media non-for-profit that everyone should look up. Look up Global Foresight Strategies and Trust in Media, because I really think that beyond this like lack of training and like what it means to think strategically and broadly and for the greater public beyond yourself, we are being strategically devastated by disinformation. That 2016 election was 100% influenced by Vladimir Putin and the Russia and the Internet Research Agency, who had targeting data provided by Paul Manafort to Klimnik, who then funneled it to the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg. We can't admit, apparently, like the Romanians did to prevent their election from being hijacked. We can't apparently admit in the United States, and I'm using this broad we, that this is what happened, because people immediately say, oh, that's a political position. Well, I'm sorry, the intelligence community was completely apolitical. The analysis was that, and many follow-up analyses, that the Russians interfered. Trump even asked them to interfere, making it sound like a joke. But then after that, any after he won, any implication that they interfered was just, you're on a witch hunt. It's a hoax. All of the above, all the
Trump
usual.
derangement syndrome. Trump derangement syndrome. Oh, and by the way, it is ironic in a sort of twisted way that now Donald Trump is preemptively blaming the Chinese for a potential loss in the midterms in November. Because I think that considering the war and everything that's going
After
on
just
around the
going to
war,
China or doing
he's
a deal
already
with them.
blaming. Yep. Look, I mean, all of that. It's just it beggars belief, I have to say. But Patty, if I take one step back, because again, I don't want to be accused of having TDS. I mean, many people do accuse me of that, and good on them for doing so, because I need these people to hold my
No,
feet to the
there's
fire.
a different definition that, and I think that is having this capacity to block out, let's just say January 6th and the lead up to January 6th and the Congressional Committee on January 6th. Like you
We don't talk
literally
about that.
have to have not watched one day of that commission, which 95% of the testimony was by Republicans who worked for Trump. You
Mm,
literally, that's derangement that you couldn't digest the reality of that. And
mm,
it's heartbreaking to see what happened to Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, that like, and that is indicative of this sickness that like telling the truth in this upside down world gets you punished. And honestly, I have said for a few years now, this is a Stalinist mindset. If you don't agree with number one, you don't, he doesn't have to shoot anyone in the head. He just needs to endanger their lives, ruin their career and their ability to make a livelihood and their reputation. And, frankly, I had an incident happen to me like that, I'm not famous, so it turned out to be a little blip, but um, my daughters were petrified because they doxed me for saying a true statement in a coffee shop. So, I mean, it's creepy. It's very creepy. But I think people, this goes back to the political IQ thing. I think that people see pieces, and depending on what media they ingest, they didn't watch any of the January 6th committee hearings. They didn't. They didn't. I have a family member who didn't know that there were 60 lawsuits brought in an attempt to prove that there was, voter fraud in the 2020 election. And they were like, what? There were lawsuits? I'm like, there were like, so that's the other part of this, right? The media environment. And this is why my friend Ellen did the trust in media. You have to be an educated digester of and being able to identify real information. And it's hard. It's so hard in this attention grabbing, economy. But these thread together, right? Disinformation threads together with Trump, what Trump's able to get away with the lack of strategic calculus in this decision making. But it all, for me, adds up to irresponsible adults. And that sounds really judgmental, and I guess it is because I've been in Washington doing national security since 1985. So like, but we got to figure out a way to get the average normal person that's not in this kind of career to go, that doesn't look right. I'm going to question that. I'm going to go for alternative sources. I'm going to be a good consumer of information, because junk food for the brain is extremely dangerous for our future, all of our futures.
I have one thing that I need to say here. Well, actually, it's another question, and it's couched in a strategic foresight manner. And I'd like to see whether you can put some meat into the sandwich here. If we talk about precedents, and in politics, we often have to talk about precedents. Some person, some outsider comes in and shakes up the system, not completely 100% shakes up the system, but shakes it up enough that when it counterbalances and comes back to center again, it's never quite as stable, right? Now, to what degree is the Republican Party culpable for what we're going through at the moment? Not because MAGA has taken over the Republican Party. I think the rot goes back even further. I mean, one could go back as far, I know a colleague of mine would say it goes back as far as Nixon, but I wouldn't be that generous to Nixon. I would say maybe the rot goes back as far as the two George W. Bush presidencies, because Americans became used to the idea of a president who was shooting from the hip in a very cavalier manner. They were also used to the idea of a president who was playing the religious vote in a very overt fashion. And what we're seeing at the moment, and it's kind of weird and blows my mind when I think about it, a religious person in America should probably be walking a million miles per hour on the opposite direction and not running into the MAGA camp, because Donald Trump represents everything that a religious person should not theoretically stand for. Now, I know that there's the argument that we don't know what's in the mind of God and God sent Trump to deliver us from evil. But if Trump himself is the epitome of all the things that are wrong with the human species, he is not a force for good. I don't understand what's going on in, especially the evangelical aspect of the religion. I mean, the more orthodox religions, Catholic and Protestant and so on and so forth, will have a very different take, or maybe not, but I think predominantly they do. But what I don't understand is people had been blindsided by the way the Bush administration and the neocons were mucking around with all the things that Donald Trump has really mastered. And yet we don't take the time machine the way back and go back to the Bush administration and say it was under the Bush administration that all these precedents had been put together, which meant that inevitably America would throw up a Trump-like figure at some point to really drill down on the George W. Bush period and turn it into their own thing. Was it a case of hubris or a sense of national pride that you would never get anyone like George W. Bush again, so we're safe, we're in the clear? You know, we'll get another Clinton figure, we'll get an Obama, we'll get someone common sense. And the Republicans, well, they'll go through their usual ructions before they throw someone back that's genuinely quite a competent person. So we've got
Look at
nothing
all
to
the
see
people, look at
here.
all the people they could have picked in 2016.
Right.
Jeb
Right.
Bush, John Kasich, like there
Right.
were so many.
Right. So again, can we use strategic foresight in the early noughties to determine that if we get a Bush, at some point down the line, we're going to get a Trump or a Trump-like figure? Well, was that a foresight that people had back in the early noughties, or was it just so inconceivable to the American thinking, especially in the Beltway in politics, that this nightmare that we're all seeming to live through right now was even possible? Because there's a blind side to foresight, right?
I
Oh, it
mean,
can never happen here. Never in a million years. Ah, you're a
but
conspiracy theorist, right?
I mean, I left the Republican Party because I saw the writing on the wall. And
Right, right.
what I saw, because I thought George Bush, the dad, was a wonderful president. Brent
Absolutely.
Scowcroft was his, like Dick Cheney was a really good Secretary of Defense. I was in the Pentagon the whole time. He was very responsible.
Mm,
Um, but and then Bob Dole, like everyone loved Bob Dole. I
mm,
think he just wasn't himself when he ran in terms of he had a very charismatic personality in person, but he didn't project that.
mm.
McCain, if he had won that primary, would have been president because every Democrat I talked to after that was like, I loved McCain. And this is McCain with Lieberman as I think he had picked Lieberman as the VP.
Mm, mm, mm.
Thinking back, I'm like,
No, I'm thinking along the same
right.
lines.
Like, I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
paid
yeah,
so
yeah.
much just attention to John McCain in the primary,
Mm,
but I mean, he didn't get that far, but he floated that. Anyway, my point is that there were some really important issues that John McCain was running on in 99, 2000, and started running on before that, and that was campaign finance reform.
yep, yep.
And right, and campaign finance reform is the attempt to mitigate what John McCain called a system of legalized bribery. And I had some campaign experience at different levels. Before that, I worked, when I was just coming to Washington, and I worked for this group that then they're like, oh, you're our intern. Do you want to work at the senatorial committee of the Republican Party? And I was sort of like, well, I think I'm a Democrat in New York, but like, sure, I'll learn. So I had lots of little firsthand experiences of, the whoever gives big money gets the front seat, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
John McCain started campaigning on that, that's when I fell in love with him. I absolutely read the books, Nightingale Song about his POW experience, his early, all of, I have read all that. But I didn't pay attention to him until he started saying this is at the rot of the way that we develop policy is not clean. It's not necessarily based on facts and what's best for the whole population. I don't mean to go down another like side road here, but it is absolutely part of what's wrong with our politics and the way we raise money. And I had to do it when I ran for the House of Delegates, and it's just bizarre. Because you have to go to all these single issue groups who have, a political action committee that's aggregated, people that want X to happen and people that
Yeah.
want, and I apparently, when I first ran, there was this group that I ran because I had become an independent, and then the Democrats agreed with everything I said. And then they were like, will you run for the House of Delegates for us? And I was like, well,
Mhm.
since you agree with everything I just said. So that's how that happened. But that was
Yeah.
pretty quick. And but I had seen like the weird dysfunction, these single issues that then became this conglomerate called the Tea Party, right? And then
Yeah,
that
yeah,
set the
yeah.
stage for, right? And they all
Mm,
blamed the financial crisis on
mm,
Obama. So here we go with the turning the
mm,
truth 180 degrees, right?
mm.
Remember that? It was
I do, I do.
bizarre. And it
Mm,
was these Republican operatives that did that because they knew it was the decisions in the George W. administration that all strategically aggregated into just a combination of bad decisions that led to the economic collapse of 2008, 2009. And it
yeah.
was devastating, right?
Mhm.
McCain had no chance against Obama when I think went with that legacy. But as soon as Obama won, they had to flip the script. And the
Mm,
script was now that somehow it was the Democrats' fault, that blah, 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 whatever. And that's where you see people believing complete blatant lies in 2009. And, and the whole birth certificate crap that Trump pulled off, like, right?
mhm,
That was
mhm.
the Tea Party people were into that.
Yep.
Um, I don't want to say all of them. But here, let me step back just a minute because I have a lot of friends that are like, they don't know what to, like, because they're like, I'm a conservative about certain things, and their identity politics are like, I'm not a Democrat because whatever. I don't,
Mm,
they spend too much money, whatever. They're too socially liberal. They don't take abortion seriously enough, whatever. So, and as a moderate, I feel like I can talk both sides, right? But Trump has made the both sides thing. He's made so many people confused about what the parties are, who's telling the truth.
Is it, Patty, just for a second, I mean, is it a matter of having taken the grey out of politics? See, I come from a belief that suggests that politics is about managing the grey zone. The grey zone is it's never black and white. We want it to be black and white because we want to understand what's going on, and gray's complex. We don't do complex. We like simple. Make it simple to us. And as the system started creaking and groaning and straining, and there were more complex things added to the system, things that the average person didn't understand and didn't like, I mean, people obviously gravitate to the demagogue who will say, I can make your life simple. Give me your vote, and I will show you the simple path to your salvation, your political salvation under my tutelage. Now, that's great. But now we have this situation. And going back to what I was saying earlier,
Yeah.
if I go back to the idea that maybe the rot really started to settle in with the George W. Bush period, and then the Tea Party came along as a consequence of disaffected Republicans and so on and so forth, and then Trump started, throwing his bombs left, right, and center in preparation for his first run to the White House. Wearing your strategic forecasting hat, where do you see the medium-term future of the United States, politically speaking? Because obviously there may and there may not be. I mean, I don't know that much about the US political mood at the moment because everything that is put onto the media could be right, could be wrong, depending on where you sit on the political spectrum. So, as far as a foreigner is concerned, looking at the United States, it's just a hot mess. I mean, one news group will say one thing, one news group will
It's a hot mess,
counteract.
John. Mhm.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so basically what will happen in say 15 years, 10, 15 years from now, once we've had two Trump terms, and they are arguably the most disruptive terms in at least modern American political history, that sets the precedent for
Not even
someone
close.
else, or will there be a Trump?
Uh,
Well, I can't say a Trump
honestly,
2.0.
I think that and maybe this is just my optimistic nature, but I know some Democrats that would be phenomenal presidents. And also like what's his name? Jeff he was a lieutenant governor of Georgia and he refused to lie and I'm blanking on his name right now. But he and there's a bunch of people who are the opposite of Trump in both parties. And I think that what I'm hoping that the American people have learned is that you don't elect a reality TV show star with a record of fraud, sexual abuse, and criminality to run the so-called greatest country in the world.
Right, right.
Um, that shouldn't be
Now,
that hard. That shouldn't be that hard. The demonstrated lack of respect for the rule of law, for the truth, for basic decency. I mean, the reason I got in trouble is because it was the morning that he said that Liz Cheney should have 9 guns pointed at her face. And 10 minutes later, this woman right next to me goes, I don't know how Liz Cheney could ever vote for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. And I was just so stunned by that comment that something came out of my mouth, which was completely true. But didn't realize she was a proud African American female MAGA that ran for the mayor of Alexandria like 2 years before.
right,
Um,
right,
and
right,
no, but her whole shtick is that an influencer. That's her whole shtick.
right.
And she is like a former flight attendant or something. And so when she was screaming at me, "You're a white liberal," I after 3 times I was like, "I'm a 35-year national security expert. Like, I don't know who you are,
Mm,
but
mm.
like the fact that you just loudly yelled that out in a coffee shop, like an hour after Donald Trump basically threatened Liz Cheney's life because he knows that people are gonna." I mean, we know what happens. We know what's happened with Miles Taylor. Miles Taylor has to have guns all over his house because he told the truth about Trump early
Mm.
on in the first administration. It's horrifying. That's why I say this is a Stalinist style regime. This man puts people's lives literally in danger. 2 people in Minnesota, was it, were murdered because of this kind of rhetoric. A Democratic legislator and her husband, I think it was, were murdered. And another one almost killed. Like this is not a freaking joke. We have a president who's inciting people to murder people. This is what's so hard for me to understand why people can't process this. So, I think, going back to trying to like just your question, what's the future here? I I would promote Tim Kaine, my senator from Virginia, former governor, phenomenal person, or my other senator who lives down the street, Mark Warner, both of them extremely intelligent, compassionate, committed, experienced, very good, very responsible moderates. Both of them would make great presidents. There's other people around the country that will not be partisan, will not, they would rebalance the ship. So it breaks my heart when I hear people from like my friends from outside the US say like the US is never going to be the US again. Well, I I disagree with that. Um, I
But
just
but
think
there is
I
one
think
thing.
we're
Sorry,
learning
sorry,
our
Patty.
lesson.
Sorry, Patty. There's one thing that I have to pick up on with you, and again, I wear my Australian hat. I'm a dispassionate observer. Well, I've got an opinion, but I'll try to keep as objective as possible. There is this other thing that's also concurrent with the rise of Trump, and that is the disaffection of the center. The very people that you were saying, the compassionate people, the ones that were highly intelligent, patriotic, all this kind of stuff. We've seen this all before. And many people who rebelled against the system call it the swamp because they were taking their kickbacks. They have lobby groups. They have well, as John McCain was going to be
The
campaigning
past.
against, all the super PACs and all this corruption. And people were looking at that system saying something's got to give. The unfairness, even under the most ideal democratic circumstance, was still sliding into the abyss. We were getting an increasing gap between the wealthy and the not so wealthy, which was obviously breaking the old Rooseveltian New Deal philosophy that's kept America from having a class war after all this time. And people just got angry. And so, of course, when Trump comes along, the demagogue who promised the world, and obviously hasn't delivered as well as he promised, but the thing is, well, the thing is, Patty, is it's like, where do the disaffected go? You can't go back into time. I mean, you can rebel against Trump if you want, but then you're bringing back the same old people that with the same older mentality to reinvent the swamp. They know that the anger about Trump, well, they can
Well, can
ride
I
that
just
crest of a
say the
wave.
the so-called swamp was most of that was complete BS. Like we, as a government employee, you have ethics training every year, you have financial disclosures, you have, the oath of office. Like being in the intel community, there were some bad actors in terms of just not bureaucratically like collegial, let's put it that way. But the as far as I experienced, there was very, very, very well, I didn't really see what this so-called swamp was. Okay. And I was in the Pentagon, as I said, for 20 years. There were a few incidents of people doing things like that pale in comparison to Trump's behavior, but getting a job offer and then maybe approving an acquisition program and then getting high. Those things were going on here and there, and those people got prosecuted. Um, but the swamp came to town somewhat with Trump won pieces, and now it's fully taken over. And it's not like there's not a bunch of people in the system that are desperately trying to bring some sanity. I mean, I know people that work in the Pentagon, either they're career civil servants, et cetera. They're trying to breathe, they're trying to keep their head above water, they're trying to do the right thing. But it is heartbreaking when one of my friends, my last boss at DNI, who's been in the Pentagon, but career DoD official, said after whatever 40 years, it's um they're like kids running the Pentagon, and all the experienced people are taking orders from the kids. So the lunatics have taken over the asylum, and the asylum guards and therapists are subservient. I mean, it's very dangerous. We're in a very dangerous period. So if you want my strategic foresight, we are going to be paying, and I can't predict exactly how, but we're paying right now for the Oh yeah, let's just bomb Iran. Let's bomb Iran last year and declare that we got all their nukes. And then let's bomb them again. And then we'll just tell whatever. We're just bombing Iran. We're just
And we will tell whatever, right? Because I mean, the truth has been
oh, they will.
judiciously missing.
That is the heart, right? That is the
Uh,
heart of the Stalinist model. There
mm,
is no real truth. The
yeah.
only truth is what the dear leader, what comes out of his mouth. I never in my entire life thought that we would be in this situation because I thought my fellow citizens were getting educated enough in high school that they would be watching for this stuff. I mean, I learned this in seventh grade, like what led to World War II in depth, the kind of mass psychology, the kind of follow the, the most demographic, all of that. My seventh grade social studies teacher hammered that into my head.
But also there is a difference. I mean, there's a generational problem here as well. I mean, while you were going through high school, the system was more functional than it is today. From what I understand about US schooling, there are the private colleges that do really well, and then there are the public schools that have been basically cut off from all funding and they can't even pay their teachers correctly. So that means that the people who would be in the lower middle class and the lower classes do not have access to anything other than their social media account where they get most of their news directly from the source and believe it immediately. There is no critical thinking in that sense because at least half of the US population has no access to that, which then leads me to the next thing. We started this conversation about strategic foresight, Patty, and we were talking about the discipline necessary to create the perfect platform for analysts to understand what's going on in the world. But since the US political situation has changed, the environment in the Washington Beltway has become politicized. How much of that of an impediment is that, and will that continue to be? Because, when you can't speak truth to power, and as you say, you've got a more Stalinist kind of system sitting on top of you, that is not conducive to a degree of having an honest debate with somebody when their entire, I don't know, career, fortune, whatever, is tied to loyalty to the leader, to the great leader. So again, are we seeing the capacity for the United States to think ahead be cut back critically, which then means its ability to function at a foreign policy and defense policy level becomes diminished as a consequence?
So there's been a lot of internal damage. I think if we can change the Congress this fall, if we can get a Democratic or independent candidate in 2028 that is strategic, that sees the strategic danger of not reforming the educational system, not dealing with income inequality and all the things that fall out of that, right? That reestablishes a Department of Justice that respects the professionalism that was there for decades, for rule of law, and anti-corruption efforts. And um, things are upside down right now. And but it's a sickness. And you started talking about some of the things that led to the sickness, right?
Hmm.
That enabled people to be vulnerable to, well, Trump's got all the answers because he's an outsider. Um, wasn't really an outsider. I mean, he's been
Hmm.
pumping, millions of dollars into the political system for decades, right, to get his way
Yeah.
on things. So what I'm hoping people are learning is that being a US leader, governmental leader at any level takes a certain amount of expertise, ethical standards, um,
Hmm.
and deep respect for the greater public good. And contrast with Obama and also McCain. It just breaks my heart that McCain was never president, and we've had this horrific human being as our president twice. It's just inexplicable. I was third in line, by the way, to see John McCain lying at the Capitol after he passed away because I
Mm,
loved him.
mm,
Um, so like a John McCain kind of figure. I don't think we're gonna have like that level of like war hero, but like a John McCain kind of figure who's willing to fight for the core things, campaign finance reform, shoring his proposal was to use the surplus that was left by the Clinton administration to shore up Social Security and Medicare. And what did W do? He gave all that money like piecemeal back to people to put in their pocket instead of
mm,
shoring up like, you know what I mean? Like that there's being a social conservative
mm.
to me means you have programs that people rely on that people have been paying in for, you make sure they're solvent. That's conservative, not like here, have a $400 check. Like so sorry. You can tell I've done a lot of politics and a lot of national security because I can talk all over the place and how they're related. But
Yep,
I'm afraid I'm not completely answering all your questions, but I think you're trying to spin it back around to like what is the foresight required now to right the ship of state?
correct,
And
correct.
I think that is rooted in the who. I don't know what the Republican Party is going to do. What do they do after this? I mean, I think Marco Rubio's trying to position himself somehow miraculously thread the needle and right? I wouldn't be shocked if he was their candidate because he seems to be doing a pretty good job walking this tightrope. But the Democrats have to come up with someone who's just so solid on these core issues and is an incredible communicator like Obama was, right? Because people, I don't know, Trump has some weird charisma, right? I don't know what that is, but like
No, neither do I.
people default to whoever excites them, right?
Mm, mm, mm.
And so we need someone who's natural at that. Like there are a bunch of politicians that they might be wonderful leaders, but they also need a little more pizzazz. I don't know if they can acquire that.
Yeah. Well,
So,
the only hopeful, Patty, the only hopeful sign that I see at the moment is that there are a number of veterans who have gone to Afghanistan and Iraq who have cycled back into the system and have taken up political office at state legislature level.
yeah.
And I think that from what I understand, these people are highly competent. I don't know just how their charisma tracks because I'm not an American and I don't study these things with, laser focus. But I suspect you've got a pool of talent that the parties can draw from. The question, of course, is,
Yes.
and this is something that concerns me, the United States, in spite of whoever runs the country, is a gerontocracy. We saw it with the likes of the
Mhm.
Nancy Pelosi's of the world, the Mitch McConnells of the world, the Donald Trumps of the world, the Joe Bidens of the world. I mean, your political class is too bloody old, right? I mean, there has to be a time where, yeah, age can be respected. I mean, look, I'm no bleeding heart liberal from an American perspective, but I do admire the likes of someone like Bernie Sanders. He can talk. Oh my God, he can talk. He can excite the base, like, his base in particular. And for someone who's in his 90s, fantastic. He is an
Yeah.
exception. He's not the
He's
common
not
run
in
of the
his
mill.
90s yet.
Oh, well, I mean, he's heading
It
toward there.
just
But
seems like he might be. Sorry,
well,
Bernie.
yeah, he's,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
sorry,
but like
Bernie, we
we
didn't mean,
have, Andy Bashir and Roy Cooper are like Democratic governors of red states. We've I Abigail Spanberger, Mikey
yeah, yeah,
Sherrill won their
yeah.
governors races last year. And both New Jersey and Virginia it's not like they're solid red or blue for history. They've I mean Virginia's gotten much more blue. Um,
Mm, mm, mm,
but moderate blue. Like they
yeah.
respect national security people. They respect, elected various Democratic governors, and I wouldn't say any of them were actually liberal. In some kind of like Bernie Sanders sort of way.
Let's go back to some of the more general questions that I wanted, because initially this conversation started off with I wanted to probe you for what your thoughts were on the current state of play with regard to Trump's Iran program, the nuclear weapons program that allegedly had been obliterated last year and yet still needs to be hammered because they were not as obliterated as we first thought. So if we loop back into a more general sense of what it takes to be a strategic forecaster, I would argue that despite unprecedented access to information today, governments and organizations continue to be caught off guard by major events. Why does this keep happening? I mean, we had 9/11, we've had Pearl Harbor. I mean, and okay, you can forgive the Pearl Harbor aspect because intelligence was primarily human intelligence or human, and that's imperfect by the very nature of humans being imperfect, relayers of
Yeah.
information. But now we've got the eye in the sky with satellites, 24/7 coverage, the whole box and dice. Why do we still get surprised? I mean, if we go back to Iran, the Iranians had a long history of eyeing the Strait of Hormuz, and now we can see it in real time, and yet we were still kind of shocked by the actions that the Iranians had pulled off. Go figure. I mean, why does this keep happening to us?
Well, I think one part of it is that we're addicted to hard power as a general comment, right? And I'll sort of connect this to the work that myself and my team have been doing with Ukraine for the last 2 years. Specifically the last year or so with the National Institute for Strategic Studies, which is the think tank that's part of Ukraine's National Security Defense Council, which is part of the Office of the President. We have a formal partnership with them. And the reason that happened is because they admitted, like, we don't have time to think strategically. We'd love to talk to you about how to do that better while we're fighting for our lives, right? So
Yeah,
very open-minded to this idea that we need foresight and we need a more dynamic planning process. And also, we need a way to work with our partners in a more like constructive framework for developing the strategy going forward and bringing in the foresight element in terms of like the future security of Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and then all of Europe. So like that's called integrated strategic assessment for Ukraine that encompasses strategic planning process that's infused with a very rigorous foresight process. So I'm pivoting to that because that's what I know like in my heart and soul and blood because I've been doing that for at least 2 years. And so the my point is that it doesn't happen magically, right? And using the buildup and the Bush administration, the Obama administration, respecting, keeping some people on, respecting the expertise, respecting the need for continuity, long range thinking, and implementing things. The buildup to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that took like 10 years.
did. Yes, it did.
So, so you can't have you're never going to elect someone that knows all this stuff, right? You have to elect people that have the wisdom and the basic intelligence and conscientiousness and commitment to trusting those that do, right? So that's what for me was missing in the first administration, but you still had some really strong people around, right? We were warned that in the second administration, there would not be the wise John Kelly's and, you know, General Mattis and a few other people that, at first we thought they were like right wing, and they turned out to be actually really good and actually really trying to keep Trump in check, right? Now I was going to say General Milley, but he was not an appointee. I was trying to just go with the appointees that were, Chris Krebs, super deep expertise, trusted, ran CISA, and said, yeah, the election was completely secure. That was a Trump appointee. So I know you're trying to get me back to like sort of how to fix this, and I think I just have to simplify it and say it's about leadership, seeing the value of strategic analysis, meaning we get a broad spectrum of inputs on critical issues that are unfolding that can affect human security, not just for your nation, but the world, right? And
Mm.
drive you drive these initiatives like George Bush the dad did the Kyoto Treaty initiative.
Yeah.
Somehow his son undid it. So like
Mm.
the handoff in our leadership, and I would say, this would apply to any country, the handoff has to be to a person of deep integrity and deep respect for science, knowledge, rule of law, or I don't know what we have anymore. Like, and that's what baffles me. This stuff is so plain to see that it just baffles me when people make excuses for Trump. I don't I don't get it. Kamala Harris, she wasn't a criminal. She was the opposite. She was a law enforcement person with deep experience in the Senate and as vice president.
She just didn't track. She just didn't track.
Immigration. And
Well,
immigration is was a very couple things the Biden administration I think really let us down on, and that was one of them. And they tried at the end there with the bipartisan bill that Trump hijacked and threatened people not to pass so that he could politicize it, and that he did. So and if people don't understand that how the legislative process works, that they needed to change the asylum law if they were going to change how things were happening at the border, like, or yeah. So I don't know what the answer is, John, from the grassroots up, but from the top down, the leadership needs to be brought back to rational, respectful judgment, good judgment, high integrity, public service, and that is the essential backbone of keeping the United States of America together. And that is also the backbone, I think, for all democracies that are being undermined by disinformation and sabotage and all the stuff that Putin is trying to pull off with his, I call it full spectrum warfare campaign, but most people call it hybrid or gray zone, or my buddy
mm.
Dave Kilcullen calls it liminal warfare. It's all
Yeah, yeah.
the things beyond hard power that do make a difference strategically. And that from the leader of a country, they've got to get that. They need a director of strategic planning who gets that and brings people together around that. And now I feel like I'm marketing for myself because that's what my company does. Sorry.
All right, all right. Well, here's a nice general question to help us tie up some of the loose ends here. So, organizations, and I would include political parties here, become prisoners of their own assumptions. What practical steps can leaders take to challenge conventional thinking and avoid strategic blind spots?
In the analytic community of the intelligence community, the analytic training. I didn't grow up in the intel community. I went over there, but got plenty of exposure to analytic methodologies and frameworks and cognitive bias and all that. I took some of the training courses in how to avoid cognitive bias, how to recognize it, how to, right? So some practical steps would be to expose more of government leadership to that kind of training, because a lot of the people that come in as appointees don't have that. Um, so that at least starts your own recognition that you're going down a rabbit hole, and that You might need to think about X, Y, and Z over here. Um, but that's like cognitive training, and we don't get that in high school and college either. And I don't know if these candidates for president get that. But that
Mm.
goes back to my thesis about trusting your professionals who do, recognizing what their unique skill sets are, recognizing, as you pointed out earlier, like we're cutting off our synapses for political, I mean, the bragging rights of the intelligence community has always been we try to see everything as objectively as humanly possible because
Correct.
otherwise people can die, right?
Yep.
And so having a leader that just has that basic understanding, I don't know, we're just so far off the core of what, I generally thought Obama tried to do. Obviously his breadth of experience was not huge and deep in terms of national security, but I think he did generally listen to people that had that. But back to you, I don't know if that fully answered that question, because I don't want to repeat myself about leadership, but I think that it goes back to trust and some of these initiatives like the Trust in Media cooperative is helping people become better, wiser, smarter consumers of information, which as one of my mentors, General John Allen said, like we literally have these information weapons being deployed across hundreds of platforms to millions of people, and there's nothing we can do about it.
It's a suitably upsetting and dark ending to what was a very
But
feisty
but the
conversation.
analogy to the air defense system would be the consumer can block the target or block the weapon, right? Like if
Yeah.
someone tells me something that either I know is false or I can kind of detect that they're blowing it, like this is, you know, like this is rhetoric. This is, and
Mm.
this goes on all over the political spectrum. This is,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but it is absolutely virulently being used by our enemies to undermine our country. And it equally could get some unqualified and maybe unwise person elected from any party in any country. The fascist party of France, they wouldn't have to be named the, Communist Party of Bulgaria for, I
Mm.
mean, that the guy that almost got elected in Romania that won in that first round was just a guy, like just um
Mm.
that in I think it was 10 days went from 0 to 23% in the polls. And that was all due to foreign entities, aka Russia, mostly, um, promoting this guy as the answer to everyone's prayers. And it's frightening. The Romanians had laws in place, and one of my right-hand men is a national security official from Romania who's brilliant, Iulian Cifu, and they had laws in place that made it illegal to accept foreign contributions to your campaign. And when they were able to trace the foreign contributions, they were able to say this was not a legitimate campaign. And we didn't do that in the US. But little Romania could do it and then get criticized by JD Vance for doing it. I mean, how else do you protect yourself? That guy's using foreign assets to try to become president of Romania out of the blue. Like, I'm sorry, that's illegal. It's illegal here if someone would actually give the Federal Election Commission enough money to actually do their job. So, yeah.
let me just raise something that you raised earlier about the enemies of the West, and we note that we've got a lot of autocracies, namely the Russians who are fighting a European war, the Chinese who are eyeing off Taiwan and conducting cyber and various other bullying techniques and techniques of intimidation all over its periphery.
Mhm.
So, if we're looking at these countries and we're looking at the West today, do you think that they have better strategic forecasting because they have simpler, um, the Air Force, you'd be familiar with the term the OODA loop, the
Oh
sort
yeah.
of organization and decision tree. They have a shorter
I
decision
go
tree.
way
They don't
back
have
with
to.
the OODA loop.
Yeah. So the OODA loop is much shorter in an autocracy than it is in a democracy. And so do you think that they have a qualitatively better way of understanding the world that we simply don't have because of our lengthier processes and eroding lengthier processes?
We always kind of brag that democracy is messy, but that's because it includes everyone, right?
Mm.
And we've always admitted that China has a longer view, that they're able to have the continuity to sustain that longer view because of their system. Because how long has Xi been in there now? Um,
Yeah, a long time. Yeah.
right? And in the OODA loop, the real issue is the decide part. Like there's fewer people deciding, and
Yeah.
that speeds it up, right? And then those deciders say, "You go do this," right? So that's a lot tighter. So I agree with your underlying premise. But I think that's what makes it so much more um, existentially important in the 21st century that we take this need to do our own strategic planning in a way that is very focused and very um, set up to be sustainable. That was what the Office of Net Assessment was for. But
Yeah.
we have a strategic planning shop in our National Security Council that, from what I've seen over the years, is not that. They throw like studies at them, and we can be a democracy and not have ADHD. Like we can.
Mm.
Just it's harder, right? Because you got to get people to play in the sandbox. Like, but that's leadership. And I just want to give you an example of that in my career when I went to work for the Office of the Special Envoy for the Global Coalition to Counter ISIS, which General John Allen set up for John Kerry. Um, in the State Department. It was meant to be the president's coordinator for all of the interagency activities that needed to be synthesized to execute a coherent, comprehensive plan against ISIS that took into account, ISIS's information war, their transnational criminal activities that were getting them weapon, like the humanitarian stuff that had to be dealt with, the legal, the special force, the whole set of things that need to be done was done through our interagency strategic planning process that was first put in place by John Allen. Brett McGurk went up to be the special envoy. Terry Wolf came over, former Joint Staff J5, which is, for those of you who don't know what J5 is, Director of Strategy Plans and Policy, usually. Um, and he was the J5 at CENTCOM and the J5 in the Joint Staff in the Pentagon. He came over as the deputy to lead this interagency process and also to work with Brett in orchestrating the international global coalition, which went over 80 countries, that was regularly convened at the State Department. And we had subgroups that we'd work with international partners on specific issues like return of foreign fighters. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is a democracy that decided they're going to put somebody in charge of bringing all the key players together, regularly meeting, putting it in a plan. This was a global campaign My colleagues mainly did Syria and Iraq, and then I did a lot of the, ISIS in West Africa, ISIS in East Africa, ISIS affiliates all over the world. I did a lot of that in coordination with the interagency partners. It was a beautiful example of what you can do when you put somebody in charge who has the right background, the right personality, the right integrity. I'm calling out Terry Wolf, retired Lieutenant General, Army, U.S. Army, because he was phenomenal. And then it brings me back to the issue of leadership, right? And that was inherited from John Allen setting up that whole structure, who is also retired four-star Marine General, phenomenal leadership. We've got that in our country. Those good people, they're not active under Trump because, under this administration, it's we got to let our good people come back into leadership. And as you said, the generation, those people trickled down into some phenomenal people I worked with at state who aren't at state anymore, who were brilliant. I can call out Ciara Knudsen, who was the director of strategic planning. She's freaking brilliant and was head of civil military relations at USAID, and she lost her job. She's a brilliant, wonderful person who put together the strategic plan for countering ISIS, was like at the heart of all that. She's not in government right now. Like, it's crazy the great people that are not in government right now. So we got to bring it back. We got to rise from the ashes. We got to let our allies know we love them. I mean, I had plenty of experiences with our Aussies and all of our other allies in the Pentagon, in various capacities that I worked in, that just what an incredible feeling to be working with these great people who are allies from around the world, who are part of a joint, international team. I forgot what we call those guys, but it's so inspiring. And these are countries that believe in democracy that are all heartbroken at what they see right now. And I know you, and I know you're living that.
Final closing question, if I may. What potential strategic surprises concern you the most over the next decade? What do you think we ought to be looking for?
I'm really worried about um, not being able to defend, as we referenced earlier, against Russia's very clever um, disinformation campaigns, because they've gotten so good at targeting. People don't even know they're targeted, and then they get all righteous. Well, this is my source, right? And speaking from some family experiences, um, yeah, don't listen to your sister who has two master's degrees in international affairs and 35 years or more in national security. Don't listen to me. Listen to that little TikTok video. Like, for real? Like, so that's what I'm worried about. And I'm not, we're living it here. But I think there's a bunch of European countries that I'm really fearful for, that they could succumb to the same thing.
Yep.
Pay no attention to the puppy behind me. That I that as our construct for full spectrum warfare lays out, if Russia and its partners use a variety of means targeted at the same strategic objective, and I have slides for this, John, but if they use a set of means, some of which are absolutely not attributable or not measurable in the near term, we are frogs boiling in the pot. And for those of us who understand that democracy is messy, but absolutely essential to the human spirit and to eventual, progress towards greater justice and greater equality, I I'm really fearful about the potential for North Korean troops to be sent into Ukraine for real this time. And if the US doesn't join in NATO doing something to counter that, how's that going to go? Ukraine is struggling dearly with manpower right now, and they're literally holding the line based on their incredible courage and their incredible ingenuity and some, you know, European countries that and Australians. Some of
Mm,
my Australian friends are living in Kyiv right now. Um,
mm,
that is a strategic threat that the combination of the continued targeted disinformation to get Marie Le Pen elected.
mm,
Um, thank God Hungary went the way it went, but there's still a lot of danger across Eastern Europe, across Czech Czech Republic. You know, Slovakia's shaky. Poland could potentially be shaky. They're obviously trying to stir up trouble and, you know, get Ukrainians to be seen as invaders in Poland. And Poland was the country that welcomed them with open arms because they know it's at stake. But now they're trying to stir up trouble there. Um, they're targeting gas stations, so the Ukrainians will have less mobility. And in retaliation for the Ukrainians saying, well, you know, we know that you're funding this war based on your oil and gas resources. So those are legitimate targets because they're allowing you to kill us.
mm.
So there's, you know, I'm zeroing in on Ukraine and Eastern Europe standing up to Russia with the backbone of the European Union and NATO partners. But if the US does something to weaken that in conjunction with some leaders of key NATO and EU countries, um, you know, Macron, any of the stalwart Ukraine supporting leaders get replaced with Putin favorites, I think it's really then it really is World War III. I don't know how things shake out, but that's what I was warning about with people considering voting for Trump in 2024. I think it sets the foresight is that it sets the conditions for World War III because Putin sees Trump as someone who can be manipulated based on what Trump wants for Trump and his family. Um, and based on his lack of conscientiousness, knowledge, trustworthiness, all of the above around what the country itself and its partners, democratic partners, need to preserve democracy. Obviously, Trump didn't care about preserving our own democracy January 6th because he knew that he lost. So I think we're in a lot of danger up against this highly expert Russian disinformation machine and the willingness of China, North Korea, and Iran to enable Russia and vice versa. It's a really frightening prospect that has not gone away because little old Ukraine hasn't gotten run over yet. We're on thin ice. We, the democratic world, are on thin ice.
Wow. Okay. Well, Patty, thank you very much for sharing your insights on the focus. We'll leave it there, but I have to say, we hope that we can call upon you again. There are a bunch of questions that I've prepared that I hadn't even asked you, and I would love to have a chance to get that second crack in if you're willing to do that.
I don't want to leave on a negative, but like that's the job of strategic
Yeah.
foresight is to say the Titanic is going straight to the iceberg. Under the iceberg, there's a lot worse. There's worse stuff underneath. Like, and you need to turn the wheel now.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
that's what I'm saying. We need to
Yeah.
turn the wheel now. And for the US, that means our midterm elections.
Well, fingers crossed that it all works out the way that we hope it does. But, we're living in a world of constant surprise right now, so anything goes.
My core people are the Europeans that get it. And then I have some partners from Australia who are doing various things. towards the same end and are kind of waiting in the wings to help once we get rolling with some real strategic work for Ukraine and its partners. So I'm hoping that plays out soon with hopefully with the European Union, but that's still in the works. But we have to mobilize around this way I just expressed the danger. We have to strengthen what's already there. I think the EU, I love Kaya Kallas's statements. People are like, "Oh, too much." I'm like, "No, not too much." Like she is blatantly expressing what is going on and what we need to do. And I hope that other leaders will have her backbone and get more unity around the strategy, foresight, long-term planning, and not just around who's given what weapon systems this month, right? Because
Yeah.
it's more than that. And there's some great work being done by the EU Institute for Strategic Studies, the Hybrid Center of Excellence, Cyber Center. There's these separate centers of excellence that are doing amazing work, but it's not all being brought together into like one strategy that then can be a guideline for burden sharing, between the countries, between NATO, EU, all the partners of Ukraine that need to strengthen the backbone of democracy. And that's where I think we need to go next.
One of the biggest takeaways from our conversation is that strategic foresight is not about having a crystal ball. It isn't about predicting exactly what will happen next. Rather, it's about recognizing that the future is shaped by choices, uncertainty, and the interaction of forces that are already unfolding around us today. History teaches us that strategic surprise rarely comes from events that emerge completely out of the blue. More often, it comes from warning signs that were visible but misunderstood, dismissed, or otherwise ignored. The challenge for leaders, whether in government, business, or our own personal lives, is to cultivate the discipline to question assumptions, challenge conventional wisdom, speak truth to power, and think beyond today's headlines. In an era defined by accelerating technological change, geopolitical competition, and increasingly interconnected global risks, the ability to anticipate change may become one of the defining strategic advantages of the 21st century. Now on to questions for our audience. What do you think is the single greatest strategic surprise that governments are failing to prepare for today, and why? Do you believe our political systems are capable of thinking strategically over the long term, or have short electoral cycles made genuine foresight almost impossible? If strategic foresight became a core part of government, business, and education, what one decision do you think we'd make differently today that would leave us better prepared for tomorrow? Let us know in the comments section below. Thanks to you all for joining us, and my thanks to our producers Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please like, subscribe, and share this episode. It really does help us continue bringing thoughtful voices from around the world to your screens. Until next time, I'm Dr. John Bruni, and you've been listening to the Focus Podcast.